Good evening, friends. Get ready for 4 terrifying horror stories. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. We're on a mission to reach 1,000 subscribers. Now, without further delay, turn off the lights, adjust the volume, and let's go straight into the fear. I've been a nurse for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the human body could endure. Gunshot wounds that turned emergency rooms into abattoirs. Burns so severe that skin sloughed off like wet paper. Children shaken so hard their brains hemorrhaged. I worked trauma in Anchorage for 15 years before the nightmares got bad enough that my therapist suggested a change of scenery. Something slower, she said. Less violent. So at 45, I took a position at Norton Sound Regional Hospital in Nome, an isolated city on Alaska's western coast where the Bering Sea freezes solid and the nearest tree is 100 miles away. The night shift at Nome was supposed to be quiet. Frostbite cases. The occasional domestic incident. Fishermen with hypothermia. Nothing like Anchorage, where Saturday nights brought a conveyor belt of knife wounds and overdoses. I worked 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the emergency department, often alone except for a single doctor on call and a security guard who spent most of his shift in the cafeteria watching Korean dramas on his phone. February in Nome is darkness incarnate. The sun makes a brief, anemic appearance for a few hours each day, barely cresting the horizon before retreating like it's afraid of what it might illuminate. The rest is black. Not the soft darkness of a summer night, but something heavier, more oppressive. The kind of darkness that gets inside you. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday when they brought him in. I remember the exact time because I was watching the clock, counting down the hours until dawn, when Tyler, our security guard, burst through the door supporting a man who could barely stand. The patient was maybe 35, white, average build, wearing nothing but jeans and one boot. No shirt. No jacket. In February. In Nome. Where the temperature outside was hovering around -23. Found him walking down Front Street, Tyler panted, struggling to hold the man upright. Just walking in circles, talking to himself. The man's skin was mottled purple and white, the telltale signs of moderate hypothermia. But he was conscious, his eyes open and tracking movement with an intensity that made my stomach clench. His lips were cracked and bleeding, moving constantly, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. "Let's get him into trauma too," I said, taking his other arm. His skin felt like touching frozen meat. We guided him to the examination room, and he came willingly enough, though his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the walls, the ceiling, the corners where shadows pooled. Dr. O'Colick arrived within minutes, a Inupiaq woman in her 50s who'd seen more Arctic medical emergencies than anyone in the state. She examined him quickly, efficiently. Core temp is 89. He's hypothermic but stable. "Sarah, start warming protocols. Blankets, warm 4 fluids. Let's bring him up slowly." I started in 4 line while Dr. O'Colick tried to get information. Name. What happened. How long he'd been outside. But the man just kept whispering, his voice a raspy thread of sound. I leaned closer, trying to hear. "Have to go back. They're waiting. Can't leave them. Have to go back." "Sir, you're safe now," I said in my calmest nurse voice, the one I use for psych patients and terrified children. "Can you tell me your name?" His eyes locked onto mine, and what I saw there made me step back involuntarily. Not confusion. Not the glazed look of hypothermia. But desperation so raw it felt obscene to witness. "The voices," he whispered. "In the ice. They won't stop." I have to go back before sunrise. Dr. O'Connell caught my eye and made a subtle gesture. Psych case. Not unusual. The Arctic darkness does things to people's minds. Seasonal affective disorder on steroids. Psychotic breaks induced by isolation and vitamin D deficiency. We saw it every winter. We're going to give you something to help you relax, Dr. O'Connell said gently, preparing a syringe of lorazepam. A mild sedative. Just enough to calm him while we treated the hypothermia. The moment the needle entered his foreport, he erupted. Not violently, that I could have handled. Instead, he began to sob, deep wrenching sounds that seemed torn from somewhere fundamental. No, no, no. They'll die, they'll freeze. I have to go back, please. It's okay, I said, though nothing felt okay. You're safe. We'll figure everything out. The sedative took effect within minutes. His eyes grew heavy, the desperate whispers fading to murmurs, then silence. We wrapped him in heated blankets, monitored his vitals, and watched his core temperature slowly climb. By 4 a.m., he was sleeping peacefully, his color improving. Just another Arctic emergency with a happy ending. Dr. O'Connell went back to the call room to sleep. Tyler returned to his Korean dramas. I sat at the nurse's station, catching up on charting, and tried to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. Something about the patient bothered me. The specific nature of his delusion. The voices in the ice. The urgency about sunrise. At 5:30 a.m., I went to check his vitals. The room was empty. The blankets were thrown back, the floor line torn out and dangling, dripping saline onto the floor. The window, a small, double-pane thing that should have been locked, stood wide open. Arctic air poured in like water, so cold it burned my lungs. I ran to the window and looked out. 3 stories down, fresh snow showed a single set of footprints leading away from the building, toward the frozen coastline. Barefoot. He'd jumped from a 3rd-story window in sub-zero temperatures and run. I hit the emergency button and Tyler came running. We called Nome PD immediately. They dispatched units to search, but in that darkness, in that cold, finding someone who didn't want to be found was nearly impossible. While we waited, I went back to the examination room, trying to understand. That's when I noticed the bathroom. The door was ajar, and light spilled out. Curious, I pushed it open. The walls were covered in scratches. Deep gouges in the ceramic tile, made with fingernails torn down to bleeding stumps. But it wasn't random damage. They were numbers. Coordinates. Scratched over and over in manic repetition. 64.5011 degrees north, 165.4064 degrees west. My hands shook as I photographed them with my phone. I knew enough about Alaska to recognize coordinates when I saw them, but these meant nothing to me. I called the police back, told them what I'd found. They found his body at 7:43 a.m., just as the sun began its brief appearance. 3 miles from the hospital, collapsed in the snow near an abandoned fish processing plant. Frozen solid. His feet were shredded, leaving a blood trail that search and rescue followed like breadcrumbs. But what disturbed them most was his position. He'd been crawling when he died, still trying to reach something. The coordinates he'd scratched led to an old mining access tunnel 8 miles north of Nome. The police investigated that afternoon. I wasn't there, but Detective Hartley told me later what they found, and I wish to God he hadn't. 3 women. Chained to support beams in a collapsed section of the tunnel. They'd been there for months, based on the forensic evidence. The man, later identified as Marcus Bellamy, a mining equipment operator from Fairbanks, had kept them prisoner in that frozen hell. He'd visit every few days with food, water, propane heaters. Just enough to keep them alive. just enough to sustain his sick fantasy of having captives who depended on him for survival. But this time, he'd stayed away too long. Some kind of psychotic break, they theorized. He'd wandered into Nome in the grip of hypothermia and delusion, genuinely hearing voices in the ice, the screams of his victims, maybe, or his own fractured psyche. The urgency about returning before sunrise was real. He knew, on some level, that they were dying. That his absence was killing them. And I had sedated him. I had stopped him from going back. The guilt is a living thing. It has weight and texture and teeth. The forensics team estimated the women had been dead for approximately 36 hours when they were discovered. Marcus Bellamy had been found at 7:43 a.m. He'd been in my care for nearly 6 hours. If I hadn't given him that sedative, if I'd just let him leave, if I'd called the police about his ravings immediately instead of dismissing them as hypothermic psychosis. Detective Hartley tried to reassure me. "You couldn't have known," he said. "And even if you'd let him go, he was in no condition to reach them. He would have died halfway there." But I don't believe him. I can't. Because I keep doing the math, keep calculating the timeline. Marcus regained consciousness around 5:15 and escaped by 5:30. He made it 3 miles before hypothermia claimed him at approximately 7:30. 3 miles in 2 hours, barefoot, in the snow. The mine was 8 miles away. If he'd left at 2:30, right after arrival, before the sedative. The women were Denise Chen, 32, a teacher from Kotzebue. Amanda Whitehorse, 27, a graduate student studying Arctic ecology. Jennifer Polk, 41, a pilot who disappeared after a cargo run to Teller 6 months prior. They'd been reported missing. Search parties had looked. Families had pleaded on the news. And they'd been 8 miles away, chained in darkness, waiting for a monster who genuinely thought he was saving them. The investigation revealed Marcus had experienced a complete psychotic break around 3 days before he wandered into Nome. His last visit to the mine had been nearly a week prior. The women had run out of food 5 days before they died. The propane heater had failed 2 days later. They'd frozen slowly, knowing rescue was impossible, screaming into darkness that swallowed sound like the Arctic swallows light. I tried to continue working. Dr. O'Colick was supportive, understanding. She'd seen trauma before, knew how it could destroy even experienced medical professionals. But I couldn't do it. Every patient who came through those doors became Marcus Bellamy in my mind. Every delusional utterance was potentially a cry for help disguised as madness. Every time I prepared a sedative, I saw those coordinates scratched into tile, saw bloody footprints in snow, saw 3 women chained in darkness. The hospital granted me medical leave. 2 weeks became 4, became 8. I started therapy, but what was there to say? I'd made the correct medical decision. Marcus Bellamy was hypothermic, psychotic, a danger to himself. Sedation was protocol. But protocols don't account for hidden minds full of dying women. They don't account for the fact that sometimes the monsters are trying to save their victims, that delusion and reality can occupy the same space, that doing everything right can still result in the worst possible outcome. I dream about them constantly. Denise, Amanda, Jennifer. I've memorized their faces from news photos, from the memorials their families held. In my dreams, they're in that mine, and I'm there too, holding a syringe of lorazepam. They're screaming for help, and I'm telling them to calm down, that everything will be fine, that they're safe now. And then I watch as they freeze, as their screams fade to whispers, as their eyes glass over with ice. The nightmares from my Anchorage years were nothing compared to this. Gunshot victims didn't haunt me. They were clear-cut tragedies, violent but comprehensible. This is different. This is knowing that my competence, my years of experience, my textbook perfect response to a medical emergency resulted in 3 women dying slowly in the dark. I moved to Nome to escape trauma. Instead, I became part of someone else's. I'm writing this from a studio apartment in Seattle, as far from Alaska as I could get without leaving the country. I can't practice nursing anymore. My license is current, but the thought of touching a patient makes my hands shake. I work retail now, stocking shelves at a Target, and even that is sometimes too much. When customers ask me questions, I see Marcus Bellamy's eyes, hear his desperate whispers about voices in the ice. Dr. O'Callaghan calls sometimes. She tells me it wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have known that Marcus would have died before reaching them anyway. But she wasn't there. She didn't see the urgency in his eyes, didn't hear the specific desperation in his voice. And she doesn't have to live with the knowledge that somewhere, in some parallel version of events, I trusted my instincts instead of my training. I didn't sedate him. I called the police immediately. I told them about the coordinates before it was too late. In that version, maybe Denise Chen is still teaching children in Kotzebue. Maybe Amanda Whitehorse published her research on Arctic ecosystems. Maybe Jennifer Polk is flying cargo runs across Alaska's interior, alive and oblivious to how close she came to dying in darkness. But that's not this version. In this version, 3 women are dead because I was good at my job. Because I followed protocols designed to keep patients safe. Because I couldn't recognize the difference between psychotic delusion and genuine, desperate truth. The worst part is knowing it could happen again. Not to me, I'll never practice nursing again, but to someone else. Somewhere, right now, there's probably a patient in an ER, raving about something that sounds impossible, and a nurse or doctor is sedating them, making the correct medical decision that will result in someone dying. We're trained to treat symptoms, to stabilize patients, to follow evidence-based protocols. We're not trained to distinguish between madness and terrible, specific knowledge. I take medication now. Sertraline for depression. Prazosin for nightmares. Clonazepam for panic attacks that hit me at random, in grocery stores, on buses, anywhere I see someone who moves like Marcus moved, with that desperate urgency. My psychiatrist is patient and kind, but I know what she's thinking: PTSD. Survivor's guilt. Moral injury. She has names for what I'm experiencing, clinical terms that make it sound treatable, temporary. But this isn't temporary. This is permanent. This is knowing that I had the power to save 3 people and instead, with the best intentions and perfect medical practice, I sealed their fate. This is understanding that competence isn't enough, that experience isn't enough, that sometimes the right decision is the wrong one and you won't know until it's too late. I'm 46 now. Only 1 year older than when I moved to Nome, but I feel ancient. I feel like I've lived a dozen lifetimes, all of them ending badly. And sometimes, late at night, when Seattle's rain sounds like whispers against my window, I hear Marcus Bellamy's voice. The voices in the ice. They won't stop. I have to go back before sunrise. And I wonder how many other voices are out there, screaming in darkness, waiting for monsters who won't return, while nurses and doctors and well-meaning professionals apply sedatives and protocols and best practices, never knowing that sometimes madness is just truth that sounds impossible until it's too late. I've been delivering packages in Juneau for 3 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me. Black ice on Douglas Island roads, bears blocking driveways in the Mendenhall Valley, drunk tourists stumbling out of cruise ships downtown. At 24, I figured I was young enough to handle the physical demands and naive enough to take the night shifts nobody else wanted. The pay differential was good, an extra $4 an hour to drive around in the darkness that swallows this city whole for most of the winter. I needed the money. Student loans don't care if you're scared of the dark. December in southeast Alaska is a special kind of nightmare. The sun gives up around 3 p.m., and by 4 p.m., you're navigating streets that feel like they exist in another dimension entirely. The darkness here isn't like anywhere else I've lived. It's thick, almost tangible, pressing against your windshield like something alive. The rain doesn't help, it falls sideways, freezing on contact, turning everything into a funhouse mirror of black eyes and distorted streetlights. That Tuesday night started normal enough. I clocked in at the depot on Glacier Highway at 6 p.m., loaded my van with the usual assortment of Amazon boxes, medical supplies, and last-minute holiday gifts that people paid extra to receive by morning. My route took me through the Mendenhall Valley, out toward Ock Bay, then back through the Lemon Creek area before finishing downtown. 43 stops, estimated completion time 1 a.m. I grabbed my scanner, my flashlight, and the thermos of coffee that would be stone cold by stop 15. The first 2 hours were mechanical. Ring doorbell, wait 30 seconds, leave package, scan, photograph, move on. Most people didn't answer at this hour. They'd hear the van, see the notification on their phones, and grab their stuff after I left. I preferred it that way. Less small talk, less fake smiling, less pretending I gave a damn about their day. I was efficient. I took pride in that. Stop 27 changed everything. The address was 4738 Glacier Spur Road, way out past the Fred Meyer, where the houses start spacing out and the streetlights become suggestions rather than guarantees. The navigation app took me down a private drive that wound through towering Sitka spruce, their branches creating a tunnel so dark my headlights seemed to get absorbed rather than reflected. The road was barely maintained, potholes filled with frozen water, the kind that could snap an axle if you hit them wrong. The house appeared suddenly, a 2-story cabin-style home with dark wood siding that blended into the surrounding forest. Every window was black. Not just dark, black, like someone had painted them from the inside. No Christmas lights, no porch light, nothing. My headlights swept across the front yard as I pulled into the driveway, illuminating a rusted swing set and a pickup truck that looked like it hadn't moved in weeks, buried under a coating of ice and pine needles. I checked the package, a small box marked urgent medical supply with overnight shipping labels plastered all over it. The prescription label showed it was anxiety medication. Alprazolam. The kind of thing you don't mess around with. The kind of thing someone might desperately need. I grabbed the box and my flashlight, stepped out into air so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. The temperature had dropped to maybe 15 degrees, and the rain had turned to sleet, those tiny ice pellets that sting when they hit exposed skin. I pulled my hood up and jogged to the front door, my boots crunching on frozen gravel. The porch was empty except for a welcome mat that said blessed in faded letters. I knocked hard, the sound dead and flat in the cold air. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I could see my breath creating clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I waited the required 5 minutes, company policy for medical deliveries, knocking periodically, ringing the doorbell that didn't seem to work, or maybe there was no power, I couldn't tell. The silence was wrong. Not peaceful, wrong. In Juneau, even in winter, you hear things. Wind through the trees, ravens calling, the distant hum of the highway. Here, there was nothing. The trees stood perfectly still. No bird sounds. No insect sounds. Nothing. I was about to leave the package and go when I heard it, a soft thump from inside the house. Then another. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Like someone walking with heavy boots on a wooden floor. Hello? I called out. Pacific Courier Service. I have a delivery for this address. The footsteps stopped. Then started again, closer. Coming toward the door. I stepped back instinctively, my hand tightening on the flashlight. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door opened maybe 6 inches. The smell hit me first, cold air, but underneath it, something else. Something organic and wrong. Not quite rot, but close. Like meat left too long in a refrigerator. A child stood in the gap. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing pajamas with dinosaurs on them. His face was pale, almost luminescent in the darkness, and his eyes were huge, unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. "Hey buddy," I said, forcing my voice to sound friendly. "I've got a package here. Is your mom or dad home?" He didn't say anything. Just stared. His hand remained on the doorknob, and I could see his fingers were dirty, nails rimmed with something dark. "Are you okay?" I asked. Something was screaming in my head, some primal part of my brain that evolved to recognize when things are fundamentally wrong. He nodded once, slowly. Then reached out with his other hand and took the package from me. His fingers were ice cold when they brushed against mine. Cold in a way that didn't make sense, even in this temperature. "Is anyone else home?" I tried again. He shook his head. Still no words. Just that staring. "You shouldn't be alone," I said. "How old are you? Where are your parents?" For the first time, his expression changed. His mouth opened slightly, and for a horrible second, I thought he was going to say something. Instead, he just breathed, a long, rattling exhale that sounded wet, like his lungs were full of fluid. Then he closed the door. Slowly. Deliberately. I heard the lock click. I stood there on that porch for a full minute, my heart hammering, telling myself I was being ridiculous. I was tired. I'd been working 10-hour shifts 6 days a week for the past month. The darkness was getting to me. The isolation. The kid was probably fine. Maybe he was used to being alone. Maybe his parents worked nights. Maybe. No. None of that explained the smell. None of that explained why every light in the house was off, why the windows looked painted black, why a child that young would be alone at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in December. I pulled out my phone and called my supervisor, Lisa. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. "What is it, Marcus?" "I just made a delivery at 4738 Glacier Spur Road. There's a kid here, maybe 8 or 9, completely alone. Something feels off." "Off how?" How could I explain it? The house is freezing. No lights. The kid won't talk. I think something might be wrong. She sighed. "Did you make the delivery?" "Yes, but..." "Then move on. You've got 16 more stops. We can't investigate every weird customer. If you're really concerned, call the police non-emergency line." She hung up. I stood there in the sleet, staring at that closed door, every instinct telling me to kick it down, to check on that child, to do something. But what? I had no authority. No right to enter someone's home. I was just a delivery driver. I took a photo of the delivered package from my records, returned to my van, and sat there with the engine running, heater blasting, trying to convince myself to drive away. That's when I noticed the window. 2nd floor, far right. There was a light, faint, flickering, like a candle. And in that light, I could see a silhouette. Small. Child-sized. Standing perfectly still, looking down at my van. I turned on my high beams, flooding the front of the house with light. The figure didn't move. Just stood there, watching. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'm a delivery driver at 4738 Glacier Spur Road. There's a child here alone, and I think he might be in danger. What makes you think he's in danger? The house is completely dark and freezing. He won't speak. He looks sick. I think something's very wrong. Is the child injured or in immediate danger? I don't know. I don't think so. But something feels wrong. Sir, I can send an officer to do a welfare check, but it might be several hours. We have limited units available tonight due to a multi-vehicle accident on Egan Drive. Several hours? There's a kid alone in a freezing house. I understand your concern, sir, but unless there's evidence of immediate danger, wellness checks are lower priority. I have your information. An officer will stop by when available. I wanted to scream. Instead, I said thank you and hung up. I should have left. Finished my route. Gone home to my apartment in the Mendenhall Valley, watched something mindless on Netflix, fallen asleep and forgotten about the weird delivery to the weird house with the weird kid. Instead, I got out of the van and walked around to the side of the house. The windows on the ground floor were covered with something from the inside, cardboard, maybe, or black trash bags. I could see it in my flashlight beam. Deliberate. Someone had blocked out every window. The thought made my skin crawl. I moved to the back of the house. The backyard was overgrown, even in winter, dead grass knee-high, a vegetable garden gone to seed, a clothesline with frozen laundry that looked like it had been there for weeks. The back door had a small window at the top, and when I shined my flashlight through it, I could see inside. The kitchen. Empty. Dark. But on the floor, I could see something, a pile of what looked like plates, all stacked haphazardly. And next to them, dozens of empty cans. Soup cans, mostly. Chef Boyardee. Campbell's. All opened and scattered. The smell was stronger here. That raw, organic smell. And underneath it, something chemical. Sharp. Cleaning products, maybe? I tried the door handle. Locked. That's when I heard it, a sound from inside that made every hair on my body stand up. A long, low moan. Not the child. Deeper. Adult. Coming from somewhere inside the house, muffled by walls and distance. Someone else was in there. I ran back to my van, grabbed my phone, called 911 again. There's someone else in the house. I can hear them. They sound hurt. This got a different response. The dispatcher's voice became sharp, focused. Stay outside the residence. Do not enter. I'm dispatching units now. I stayed on the line, standing in the sleet, watching the house. The light in the second-floor window had gone out. The moaning had stopped. Everything was silent again, that horrible, suffocating silence. It took the Juneau Police Department 23 minutes to arrive. 2 units, 4 officers. I met them in the driveway and explained everything, the child, the smell, the sounds. One of them, a sergeant named Patterson who I recognized from a domestic call I'd witnessed last year, took my statement while the others approached the house. They knocked. Called out. No answer. Patterson joined them, and after some discussion, they forced the door open. I'll never forget the sound Patterson made when he came back out 6 minutes later. Not a scream, more like a choked gasp, like someone had punched all the air out of his lungs. He walked straight to his patrol car, leaned against it, and vomited into the frozen grass. The other officers came out a minute later. One was on his radio, voice urgent, calling for backup, for detectives, for the medical examiner. Another was leading the child out, wrapped in a blanket, the boy's face still blank, still expressionless. Patterson eventually came over to me, his face gray, his eyes not quite focusing. "You saved that kid's life," he said quietly. "If you hadn't called." "Jesus Christ. What happened in there?" He shook his head. "You don't want to know." But I did. I needed to know. And over the next 3 days, as the story broke across local news and then made national headlines, I learned everything. The parents had died 4 days earlier. Carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heating system. The father first, then the mother hours later. The child, his name was Ethan, I learned, Ethan Morrison, 8 years old, had found them in their bedroom, cold and still, and his young mind had simply broken. He didn't call for help. Didn't tell anyone. He continued his normal routine, going to their room each morning to say good morning to their corpses, eating from cans because he couldn't cook, accepting deliveries when they came, all while his parents decomposed in the bedroom upstairs. The medical examiner said the bodies had been dead for approximately 96 hours when they were found. The smell I noticed was early-stage decomposition, slowed by the cold. The moaning I heard was the house settling, or pipes contracting in the freezing temperature, or maybe my imagination. They couldn't be sure. But here's the part that still wakes me up at night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Ethan had been maintaining them. Washing their faces. Combing their hair. Changing their clothes. The chemical smell was from the cleaning products he used, trying to make them better. He covered the windows because he didn't want the neighbors to see that Mommy and Daddy were sleeping. Child Protective Services took him. I heard later he was placed with relatives in Anchorage, but I don't know if that's true. I've tried to find out more, tried to understand why he didn't call for help, why he didn't scream or cry or run to a neighbor. There's a psychologist's report somewhere, sealed because he's a minor, that might explain it. Trauma response, they said on the news. Dissociation. A child's brain protecting itself from something too horrible to process. I want to find that report. I need to understand. How does a child perform normalcy while surrounded by death? How does an 8-year-old accept a package with a smile while his parents rot upstairs? What was going through his mind when he looked at me with those huge, empty eyes? I quit Pacific Courier the next week. Couldn't finish my shift that night, they had to send someone else to complete my route. I spent 3 days in bed, unable to eat, unable to sleep without seeing that pale face in the darkness, those dirty fingers reaching for the package. My therapist diagnosed me with acute PTSD. The nightmares are constant. In them, I'm back on that porch, but this time when the door opens, it's not Ethan standing there. It's his mother, gray and bloated, reaching for me with hands that fall apart as she moves. Or it's Ethan, but his mouth opens impossibly wide, and instead of words, that long, rattling exhale goes on forever, filling the air with the smell of death. I can't do deliveries anymore. Can't knock on doors without my hands shaking, can't approach dark houses without panic rising in my throat like bile. I took a job at a coffee shop downtown, making lattes for tourists, something safe and bright in public. But the questions haunt me. They follow me through my days, lurking at the edges of every conversation, every quiet moment. Why didn't he scream? Why didn't he run to a neighbor, to a teacher, to anyone? What kind of horror lived in that house during those 4 days, and what did it do to the mind of a child who couldn't escape it? There are records. Sealed files. Police reports I can't access. Psychology evaluations locked behind privacy laws. But they exist. Somewhere in a filing cabinet in Juneau or Anchorage, there are answers to why Ethan Morrison chose to live with death rather than ask for help. I'm going to find them. I have to. Because until I understand what happened in that mind, in that house, during those 96 hours of silence and decay, I'll never sleep through the night again. I'll never stop seeing that pale face in every shadow, never stop smelling that raw, organic smell when I close my eyes. The truth is in those files. And one way or another, I'm going to uncover it. Even if what I find is more terrifying than the questions that torment me now. I've been driving the Richardson Highway between Anchorage and Valdez for 11 years, and I thought I knew every mile of that treacherous ribbon of asphalt. 404 miles of some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America, mountain passes that'll kill you if you sneeze wrong, avalanche zones marked with those cheerful orange signs that might as well read "you could die here," and stretches so remote that if your engine quits, you're looking at hypothermia before anyone finds you. In summer, I run tourist vans, pointing out the Matanuska Glacier and the Worthington Glacier like some kind of nature documentary narrator. In winter, I haul medical equipment, machinery parts, whatever needs moving when the weather's too dangerous for the regular drivers. January is the worst month. The darkness is oppressive, swallowing the landscape whole by 3 in the afternoon. The temperature drops to -20, -30, sometimes lower up in Thompson Pass. Black ice forms in patches you can't see until your wheels are already skating across it. I've seen vehicles go over the edge, tumbling down into ravines so deep the search and rescue teams don't even bother looking until spring thaw. That Thursday started wrong. My alarm didn't go off, so I woke up at 4:47 a.m. instead of 4 o'clock, already behind schedule. The load I was supposed to pick up, industrial medical equipment for the hospital in Valdez, was sitting in the warehouse lot, but the paperwork was screwed up, wrong shipping codes, and I spent 40 minutes sorting it out with dispatch while the sky stayed black as pitch. By the time I pulled out of Anchorage, it was almost 6:30 a.m., and I was running 2 hours late for a delivery that was supposed to arrive by 2 p.m. The first 100 miles were routine. Highway 1 heading northeast, past Eagle River, past Palmer, the lights of civilization thinning out until it was just my headlights and the occasional semi hauling freight to Fairbanks. The radio faded to static around mile 70, leaving me alone with the sound of my tires on frozen asphalt and the grinding heater that barely kept the cab above 50 degrees. I hit the Matanuska Glacier around 8:30 a.m., just as the sky was beginning to show that weak, anemic gray that passes for daylight in an Alaska winter. The glacier loomed to my left, a massive wall of ice glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but it never stopped being unsettling, something about all that frozen water, millions of tons of it, just sitting there, waiting. The accident site appeared around mile 83. Fresh, maybe an hour old. A sedan had gone off the right side of the road, down into the drainage ditch, its rear end sticking up at an angle, hood buried in snow. No other vehicles around. No police. No ambulance. Just the car and the churned up snow where it had left the road. I should have called it in and kept driving. That's what you're supposed to do, report it to the Alaska State Troopers and let them handle it. But I've seen what happens when people wait for help at -25 degrees. I've seen the bodies they pull out, frozen solid in the driver's seat, faces locked in expressions that'll haunt you. I pulled over, grabbed my flashlight and emergency kit, and climbed down into the ditch. The car was empty. Driver's side door hanging open, no one inside, no blood that I could see. Footprints led away from the vehicle, heading northeast, deeper into the wilderness. Someone had walked away from the crash. That was good. That meant they were alive. But the footprints were erratic, weaving, like someone disoriented or injured. I followed them for maybe 30 yards before I saw him, a man, probably mid-50s, wearing jeans and a light jacket, completely inadequate for the temperature. He was standing next to a cluster of spruce trees, facing away from me, absolutely motionless. "Hey!" I called out. "You okay?" "I saw your car." He didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge me at all. I moved closer, my boots crunching through the frozen crust of snow. "Sir, you need to get somewhere warm. You're going to freeze out here." Still nothing. I was maybe 10 feet away now, close enough to see that his jacket was torn at the shoulder, close enough to see his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. He was alive, breathing. But something about his posture, the absolute stillness of him, made my stomach tighten. "I've got a van right up on the road," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, friendly. "Let's get you warmed up, and we'll call for help." That's when he turned around. His face was wrong. Not injured, wrong. His eyes were too wide, pupils dilated so much they looked black, and his mouth was hanging open in a slack, almost peaceful expression. But it was his skin that made me step back involuntarily. It was mottled, bluish-gray, the color of someone in advanced hypothermia. Frostbite was already claiming his nose and ears, the flesh there darker, almost black. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "How long have you been out here?" He smiled. Actually smiled. Then he spoke, his voice surprisingly clear, almost cheerful. "I need to go back." "Back where?" "To your car. We need to get you medical attention. Back to Anchorage." He took a step toward me. "I need to go back right now." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of someone discussing the weather. "Okay," I said carefully. "I can take you to Valdez, and we can arrange transport from there." "No." The word came out sharp, violent, and his hands clenched into fists. "I have to go back. I have to go back before sunrise. Before they find out." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced at the sky. It was already getting lighter, that gray dawn creeping across the mountains. Sunrise was maybe 30 minutes away. "Before who finds out?" I asked, taking another step back toward the road. He didn't answer. Just stared at me with those horrible, dilated eyes, his breath coming faster now, creating bigger clouds in the freezing air. Then he looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly, examining them like he'd never seen them before. They were covered in blood. Frozen blood, dark and crusted around his knuckles and under his fingernails. My mind started racing. Maybe he'd cut himself in the accident. Maybe he tried to dig his way out of the car and torn his hands up. Maybe. "I didn't mean to," he said softly, still looking at his hands. She wouldn't stop screaming. I just wanted her to stop screaming. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. Get back to the van. Lock the doors. Drive away. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think rationally. The man was clearly in shock, hypothermic, probably suffering from a head injury. People say crazy things when they're dying of cold. Hallucinations are common. He probably didn't even know what he was saying. "Let's get you warm," I said again, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. "Then we can sort everything out." He looked up at me, and for just a second, his expression cleared. Became almost lucid. Almost sane. "You seem like a good person," he said quietly. "You stopped to help. That's good. That's kind." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "She was kind too. At first." Then he lunged at me. I don't remember making the decision to run. One second I was standing there, the next I was scrambling up the embankment toward the road, my boots slipping on ice, my hands grabbing at frozen vegetation to pull myself up. Behind me, I could hear him following, his breathing ragged, his footsteps crunching through the snow. I made it to the van and threw myself inside, slamming the door and hitting the locks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Through the windshield, I saw him emerge from the ditch, still moving, still coming toward me with that horrible, purposeful walk. The engine turned over on the second try. I threw it in gear and accelerated, tires spinning on the ice before finding purchase. In my rearview mirror, I watched him standing in the middle of the highway, getting smaller and smaller until he was just a dark speck against the white landscape. I drove for 10 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to grab my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. This was the Richardson Highway. I'd have to wait until I got closer to Glen Ellen or found one of the emergency call boxes. But I couldn't shake the image of those bloody hands, that slack, peaceful face. The words kept echoing in my head. I just wanted her to stop screaming. I told myself I was overthinking it. Shock makes people say insane things. Hypothermia causes hallucinations, paranoia, violent behavior. I'd probably saved his life by running. If I tried to help him into the van, he might have attacked me in his delirium. The Alaska State Troopers would find him, get him to a hospital, and everything would make sense. I almost believed it. The emergency call box appeared at mile 101 just before Tornado Pass. I pulled over and made the call, reporting the accident and the man's location, describing his condition and his bizarre behavior. The trooper on the other end sounded concerned but not surprised. They get calls about confused, hypothermic people all the time. "Stay where you are," he said. "We'll have a unit there in 45 minutes. "I can't," I said. "I'm already 2 hours behind schedule. I've got medical equipment that needs to be in Valdez by 2 p.m. He sighed. "Fine. Leave your contact information, and we'll follow up if we need a statement." I gave him my details and hung up, feeling guilty but also relieved. Let the professionals handle it. That's what they were there for. I got back in the van and continued east. Thompson Pass hit me around 11:30 a.m. 2,600 feet of elevation, some of the heaviest snowfall in Alaska, and wind that can flip a van if you're not careful. The road had been plowed recently, but snow was already accumulating again, and visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. I slowed to 30 miles per hour, white-knuckling the steering wheel, every muscle in my body tense. That's when I saw the roadblock. 2 Alaska State Trooper vehicles, lights flashing, blocking both lanes. Officers in heavy winter gear standing in the road, one of them holding up a hand for me to stop. I pulled over, my heart hammering. Had something happened? Was the pass closed? I rolled down my window as a trooper approached, a woman with a severe expression and ice crystals forming on her eyebrows. "License and registration," she said without preamble. I handed them over, trying to read her face. "Is there a problem, officer? Where are you coming from?" "Anchorage. I'm making a delivery to Valdez." "What time did you leave Anchorage?" "Around 6:30 this morning." "Why? What's going on?" She studied my license, then looked at me hard. "Did you stop anywhere along the route?" My mouth went dry. Yes. Around mile 83. There was an accident, a sedan in the ditch. I called it in from the emergency box at mile 101. "Did you see anyone at the accident site?" I hesitated. Something in her tone told me this was important, that my answer mattered in ways I didn't understand yet. "Yes. A man. Mid-50s, light jacket, jeans. He was hypothermic, acting strange. I tried to help him, but he became aggressive. I drove away and reported it." The trooper's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She stepped back and spoke into her radio, too quietly for me to hear. Another trooper approached, a tall man with a gray mustache. "Describe the man," he said. I described him, the wrong color of his skin, the dilated eyes, the blood on his hands. As I talked, I watched both troopers' faces carefully. They knew something. Something bad. "What did he say to you?" the woman asked. "He said he needed to go back to Anchorage. That he needed to get there before sunrise, before they found out. And he said..." I paused, not wanting to say it, but knowing I had to. "He said someone wouldn't stop screaming, and he just wanted her to stop." The male trooper cursed under his breath. The woman's jaw tightened. "Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." "What? Why?" "Please step out of the vehicle. Now." I did, my legs shaking, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. They separated me from my van and walked me to one of the patrol vehicles, sitting me in the back seat while they conferred outside. Through the window, I could see them making phone calls, their expressions grim. After 20 minutes, the woman came back and opened the door. "The man you encountered is Robert Chen, age 54, resident of Anchorage. At approximately 3:42 a.m. this morning, Anchorage PD responded to a 911 call from his residence. They found his wife, Linda Chen, age 52, dead in the bedroom. Manual strangulation. Mr. Chen had fled the scene in the vehicle you saw in the ditch." The world tilted. I felt my breakfast rising in my throat. "You're saying he murdered his wife, and then..." "He was attempting to flee when he lost control of his vehicle. When you encountered him, he'd been exposed to the elements for approximately 3 hours. We found his body 45 minutes ago, a quarter-mile from where you reported him. Frozen to death." I stared at her, my brain refusing to process the information. The man I talked to, the man who'd lunged at me, was a murderer. Had killed his wife with his bare hands and then tried to escape into the wilderness. Those blood-covered hands I'd seen weren't from the accident. They were from strangling his wife to death. "The reason we stopped you," she continued, "is because we needed to verify your account. Mr. Chen was carrying a cell phone with your license plate number written in a note. We needed to determine if you were involved." "Involved?" I just stopped to help. "We know. Your timeline checks out, and there's dashboard camera footage from a semi that passed through earlier that corroborates your van being in Anchorage at 6:30 a.m. You're not a suspect. But we need your full statement." I spent the next 2 hours at the trooper station in Glen Ellen, going over every detail of my encounter with Robert Chen. The description of his appearance, his words, his behavior. They recorded everything, took photos of my van, documented the timeline. The detective who interviewed me was a middle-aged man named Kowalski, with tired eyes and coffee breath. "You're lucky," he said finally, closing his notebook. "Chen was a big guy, and hypothermic or not, if he'd gotten his hands on you in that van, you'd probably be dead. Running was the right call." "Why did he do it?" I asked. The question that had been burning in my mind since the trooper told me. "Why did he kill his wife?" Kowalski shrugged. "We're still piecing it together. Neighbors reported hearing screaming around 3 a.m. Her sister says they've been having marital problems, fighting about money, about Chen losing his job last month. Something snapped. He strangled her, panicked, tried to run. Made it about 80 miles before the weather and his own guilt caught up with him. He said he just wanted her to stop screaming." "Yeah. That tracks with what we're hearing." Argument escalated, he lost control, tried to cover it up by running. Cold got him before we could. They let me go around 4 p.m. My delivery to Valdez was shot. The hospital had already arranged alternative transport. I drove back to Anchorage in a daze, arriving around 10 p.m., going straight to my apartment and sitting in the dark for hours. I couldn't stop thinking about those moments in the ditch. How close I'd come to letting him into my van. How close I'd come to being another victim, another body frozen somewhere along that highway. I kept seeing his face, that slack, peaceful expression even as he lunged at me. A man who'd murdered his wife and then walked calmly into the frozen wilderness, believing he could somehow outrun what he'd done. The nightmares started that night. In them, I'm always back at mile 83, but this time, I don't run. This time, I help him into the van, and as I drive, his frozen hands reach for my throat. I wake up gasping, feeling phantom fingers squeezing, crushing. I tried to go back to work the following week. Made it to mile 47 before I had a panic attack so severe I had to pull over and call my supervisor, sobbing, unable to breathe. Every car I passed, every figure I saw near the road, became Robert Chin in my mind. Every shadow could be hiding a murderer. Every person who needed help could be the one who'd kill me. My therapist calls it acute stress reaction, says it's normal after a trauma like that. She prescribed medication, recommended I take time off, maybe consider a career change. But how do you change careers when you've been doing the same thing for 11 years? How do you explain to potential employers that you can't drive anymore because you picked up a hitchhiker who turned out to be a murderer, except he wasn't really a hitchhiker, he was dying in the snow, and you were just trying to help? The worst part is the guilt. The gnawing, relentless guilt that wakes me up at 3 a.m. every night. Because I knew. On some level, I knew something was wrong. His behavior, his words, the blood on his hands, every instinct I had was screaming danger, and I almost ignored it. Almost convinced myself it was hypothermia, shock, anything but the truth. If I'd been a different person, a braver person or a more naive person, I would have helped him into my van. And I'd be dead. Strangled on the Richardson Highway, left in a ditch while Robert Chin drove my van toward whatever delusional destination he thought would save him. I got lucky. That's what Kowalski said, and he's right. But it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like I glimpsed something terrible and true about the world, that evil doesn't always look like evil, that monsters can freeze to death just like anyone else, and that the line between helper and victim is so thin you can cross it without even knowing. I still live in Anchorage. Still drive past the exit for the Richardson Highway every time I go grocery shopping. But I never take it. Can't even look at it without my chest tightening, without seeing Robert Chin standing in the middle of the road, getting smaller in my rearview mirror, his bloody hands hanging at his sides. They say Linda Chin's family held a memorial service in February. I thought about going, about offering my condolences, about explaining that I met her husband in his final moments and tried to help. But what would I say? That he seemed peaceful? That he talked about her like she was the problem? That he died alone in the snow, probably feeling sorry for himself? I didn't go. Instead, I started seeing Dr. Morrison twice a week, taking Zoloft daily, and avoiding anything that reminds me of that morning. No more long drives. No more isolation. No more helping strangers on the side of the road, because the next one might not just be hypothermic. The next one might be running from something worse than the cold. I bought cabin 47 outside Talkeetna with my retirement savings, every goddamn penny I'd scraped together from 38 years teaching high school mathematics in Anchorage. 62 years old, divorced, kids grown and scattered across the lower 48, I wanted silence. I wanted the kind of peace that only exists when you're half a mile from the nearest human being, where the only sounds are wind through spruce trees and the occasional crack of ice on the Susitna River. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Patricia with 2 white teeth, assured me the isolation was exactly what I was looking for. She failed to mention what that isolation could hide. The first 3 months were everything I dreamed. I woke with the sun, spent my days reading, chopping wood, learning to be comfortable in my own skull after decades of classroom noise and teenage chaos. My nearest neighbor lived in cabin 52, exactly 2,640 feet away. I measured it on my third day, some old teaching habit making me quantify everything. I never saw anyone there. Never heard anything. Just a dark shape against the tree line, windows perpetually black. November brought the darkness. Real darkness, the kind that swallows 20 hours of every day and makes you forget what color looks like. That's when I first noticed the lights. It started on a Thursday, or maybe a Friday. Time gets slippery when the sun barely shows its face. I was making coffee around 11 p.m., insomnia being my constant companion since the divorce, when I glanced out my kitchen window toward cabin 52. Lights. Not the warm glow of someone settling in for the night, but erratic flashes. On off on off on off. Rhythmic. Purposeful. My first thought, stupidly, was Morse code. My second thought was that someone needed help. I pulled on my parka, grabbed my flashlight, and trudged through knee-deep snow toward my neighbor's place. The temperature was dropping fast, maybe 15 below, and my breath crystallized in clouds that caught my flashlight beam. The snow crunched under my boots with that particular squeak that only happens in extreme cold. Every step felt too loud, too intrusive in the massive silence of the Alaskan night. Cabin 52 sat in a small clearing, and as I approached, the lights continued their bizarre pattern. But when I reached the door and knocked, everything went dark. Not just the lights, everything. The kind of darkness that makes you question whether you still have eyes. I knocked again, harder, calling out that I was a neighbor, that I wanted to make sure everything was okay. Nothing. I tried the door. Locked. I circled the cabin, my flashlight beam cutting through blackness thick enough to taste, and found nothing. No sounds. No movement. Just fresh snow and my own footprints leading there. But as I completed my circle, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. A second set of footprints. Leading to the cabin's front door. None leading away. Someone had gone in. Recently enough that the prints were still crisp, unobscured by falling snow. I convinced myself it was nothing. A neighbor who preferred solitude, like me. Someone who didn't want company. I walked back to cabin 47, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back, watching from those dark windows. The lights happened again 3 nights later. Same pattern. On off on off on off. I went back. Same result. Fresh footprints leading in. None leading out. This time I noticed they were large, size 12, maybe 13 boots. And this time, I noticed something else that made my blood feel thick and cold. There were drag marks in the snow leading from the tree line to the back door. Like someone had pulled something heavy. A deer carcass, I told myself. Just someone bringing in a hunting kill. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I started keeping a log, trying to find a pattern, some rational explanation for what I was seeing. The lights appear every 2 to 3 nights, always after 11 p.m., always that same sequence. I called the local ranger station, asked about cabin 52. They told me it was privately owned, rented out sporadically, but they didn't have current tenant information. Not unusual for remote properties. By the 3rd week of November, I was checking the cabin twice a day. I told myself I was being neighborly, responsible. The truth was darker. I was obsessed. Those lights gnawed at me. The footprints that appeared and never left. I started having nightmares about people trapped, signaling for help in the only way they could. On December 2nd, I set up my hunting camera. A Bushnell trail cam I bought years ago for wildlife photography but never used. I mounted it on a spruce tree with a clear view of cabin 52's back door and set it to motion-activated night vision. If someone was coming and going, I'd have proof. I'd have answers. I checked the camera 3 days later. What I saw made my hands shake so badly I dropped the SD card in the snow and had to dig for it with numb fingers. The footage showed a man. Maybe 40, maybe 50, hard to tell in the infrared wash. But that wasn't what terrified me. It was what he was doing. Over and over, for hours, he exited through the back window, walked to the tree line, bent down, picked up something massive, a bag, a tarp, something that sagged with terrible weight, and carried it inside. Then he'd emerge empty-handed and repeat the process. Again. And again. And again. 17 times in one night. In the footage, he moved with mechanical precision. No wasted motion. No pause. Like a machine programmed for a single horrifying task. And twice, he stopped and turned directly toward my camera, though there was no way he could see it in the darkness. His face was blank. Not angry, not fearful. Empty. I called the Alaska State Troopers the next morning. Told them everything. Showed them the footage. They took it seriously. Alaska attracts its share of people trying to disappear, and not all of them have innocent reasons. 2 troopers arrived the next day, Sergeant McKenzie and Trooper Valdez, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else in minus 20-degree weather. We approached cabin 52 together. The troopers had weapons drawn. I stayed behind them, my heart jackhammering against my ribs. The door was unlocked this time. It swung open with a creak that sounded like a scream in the frozen air. The smell hit first. Decomposition, even in extreme cold, has an odor. Sweet and rotten and utterly unmistakable. Trooper Valdez gagged, pulled his parka over his nose. Sergeant McKenzie pushed forward, flashlight sweeping the interior. The cabin was a charnel house. 7 bodies. In various states of decay. Arranged in the back room like cordwood, stacked with terrible care. Some were frozen solid, preserved by Alaska's cruel cold. Others were newer, fresher, still soft enough that I could see where carrion beetles had found purchase. 3 women. 4 men. Ages ranging from what looked like 20s to 60s. All showed signs of violence, ligature marks, blunt force trauma, knife wounds that gaped like screaming mouths. The man had been using cabin 52 as a storage facility. A human warehouse. For 3 years, according to the forensics team that arrived later. 3 years of killing, of driving up from Anchorage or Wasilla or God knows where, of depositing his victims in this remote location where decay happened slowly and discovery was unlikely. The investigation revealed his name was Douglas Henriksen. 63 years old. Former insurance adjuster. Divorced. No children. No criminal record. He owned cabin 52 outright, had bought it 6 years prior, and visited regularly. His neighbors in Wasilla described him as quiet, polite, a little odd but harmless. The detectives found journals in his apartment documenting each kill in meticulous detail, selection process, method, disposal. He rated his victims like a sommelier rating wine. But here's what keeps me awake, what makes my stomach turn to ice water even now. The forensics team found evidence, footprints, fiber samples, cigarette butts, that Henriksen had been watching my cabin for months. From the woods. From positions that gave him clear sight lines to my windows, my routine, my life. There were notes in his journals about me. My schedule. When I chopped wood. When I made coffee. He'd been deciding. Weighing. Considering whether I would be number 8. The lights I'd seen weren't signals or Morse code. They were his flashlight, visible through the windows, as he worked on the bodies, arranging them, preserving them in his sick collection. The drag marks were exactly what I'd feared, bodies being pulled from his vehicle to the cabin. And every time I'd walked over there, knocked on that door, he'd been inside, watching me through the peephole, his hand probably on a knife, deciding. The thing that destroyed me, that shattered whatever peace I'd been seeking in retirement, was learning that he'd been there the night I set up the trail camera. He'd watched me do it, had seen exactly where I placed it, and then he'd performed for it. Those 17 trips, carrying bags into the cabin, had been theater. A message. He was showing me what he did, daring me to understand, playing with me the way a cat plays with a mouse before the killing bite. I sold cabin 47 within a month of Henriksen's arrest. Took a massive loss. No one wants to buy property next to a murder cabin, turns out. I moved to an apartment complex in Anchorage, 3rd floor, 60 other units, people everywhere. But it didn't help. The paranoia followed me like a shadow. I check every lock 7 times before bed. Every window. Every closet. I've installed 4 deadbolts on my door and a security system that would protect Fort Knox. But none of it matters, because I understand now what I didn't before. Evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look like monsters or demons. It looks like a quiet man in his 60s, someone who could be your neighbor, your insurance agent, the guy who waves hello in the grocery store parking lot. My psychiatrist, Dr. Reeves, says I have severe PTSD with paranoid features. She's prescribed medication that makes my thoughts fuzzy, that wraps reality in gauze. But medication can't erase the knowledge that for months, I was being hunted. That killer studied me, cataloged me, prepared to add me to his collection. That the only thing standing between me and becoming number 8 was his indecision, his terrible, patient deliberation. I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I drift into something like sleep, but I'm always partially aware, always listening. Every footstep in the hallway above me could be someone positioning themselves. Every car door in the parking lot could be a killer arriving. The woman who smiles at me in the elevator could have bodies stacked in her apartment like firewood. Sometimes, late at night, when the paranoia is worst, I think about those lights. On off on off on on off. And I wonder if it really was random, or if it was a pattern I was too stupid to decode. A countdown, perhaps. Or a taunt. Or a promise. Henriksen never spoke about me during his trial. Never acknowledged that he'd been watching, planning, deciding. His lawyer claimed the journals were fantasy, creative writing, that the surveillance of my cabin was coincidence. But I know better. I saw his face in that trail camera footage, turning toward the lens. I saw the emptiness there. He's in Spring Creek Correctional Center now, serving 7 consecutive life sentences. No possibility of parole. But that doesn't matter, because the Rael Douglas Henriksen isn't locked in a cell. He's everywhere. He's the FedEx driver who lingers a little too long. The maintenance man who has keys to my apartment. The elderly neighbor who keeps his blinds closed all day. Alaska's darkness is honest. It tells you what it is, cold and vast and indifferent. But human darkness hides behind smiles and normal routines and quiet neighbors who wave hello while storing bodies in their cabins, while writing your name in journals, while deciding if today is the day you disappear. I'm writing this because Dr. Reeves suggested documenting might help process the trauma. It hasn't. But maybe it'll help someone else understand. When you see something strange, something that doesn't fit, don't rationalize it away. Don't tell yourself there's a logical explanation. Because sometimes the explanation is simply this: you live next to a monster, and the only thing keeping you alive is that the monster hasn't decided to collect you yet. I'm 64 now. 2 years older than when I bought cabin 47. 2 years of medications and therapy and sleepless nights. And I know I'll never be the person I was before. That person believed in retirement and peace and the simple pleasure of isolation. That person died the day the troopers opened cabin 52's door. The person who remains just checks the locks and waits for footsteps that might be coming closer.